The first ever Spider-Man movie was a really big success. It ushered in the onslaught of Marvel's superhero movies and made Spider-Man more famous than he ever had been beforehand. Since the 2012 reboot called The Amazing Spider-Man, this movie seems to get crapped on 24/7. Does it deserve to be? Well, no. At least I don't think so. But before you stop the video, allow me to say that this is by no means a perfect movie. It has a lot of problems, and I can even agree that if this came out today, it probably wouldn't have received the same level of success that it did back in 2002. So what do I think of Tobey Maguire as Peter Parker, aka Spider-Man? Well, believe it or not, even though he's not a lot like Peter Parker from the comics, I still like him, but the main problem here is that with this film, the superpowers come first and the characters come second. This is the number one thing that should not be the case in a superhero movie. While Peter Parker seems like a nice guy, we don't really get to know him. We get about 10 minutes of him as an average Joe before he gets bit by the spider. He does what Peter Parker does in a standard Spidey origin movie. He starts taking advantage of his powers, using them to win money in wrestling matches. He fights the bully, and then Uncle Ben dies because Peter didn't stop the killer. Then Peter learns responsibility and becomes Spider-Man. So that's all there. But there's nothing really at the core of the character. He seems just a bit blah. And I don't blame that on Tobey Maguire, I blame that on the writing. With what Tobey is given to do in this movie, he does his best. And I think he's a big part of making this character likeable, despite the fact that the character is a bit bland here. In some ways, the fact that the spider bites him 10 minutes into the film can be seen as a good thing. Get right to the good stuff and don't leave us hanging. But really, the first ingredient in making a good superhero movie is putting the characters before the powers. So character-wise, this movie seems a little shallow. Especially with the scenes between Peter Parker and Mary Jane. Jesus, Mary Jane, what happened? She's written nothing like she was in the comics. But if I only disliked her because she's not a lot like her comic book counterpart, then that wouldn't be very fair to the movie. Amongst many things, a superhero movie is designed to get a fresh new audience that would never have picked up a comic book to get interested in it anyway. So if you went into this movie knowing nothing about Spider-Man, you probably liked Peter Parker more than most people. But that's not a bad thing. This movie at the time was standalone and it should be treated as such. The bottom line is that while bland and not very proactive, he's still reasonably likeable.
Go, Web! Fly! Up, up, and away, Web! Shazam!
Unfortunately, the same can't be said for Kirsten Dunst as Mary Jane. In this movie, Mary Jane isn't really anything more than a pretty girl, who isn't particularly likeable, and ultimately she just takes on the role as the typical damsel in distress. She's at a parade, Spider-Man has to save her. She's in an alley, Spider-Man has to save her. She gets kidnapped by the Green Goblin, and wouldn't you know it, Spider-Man has to save her. And when she's not being rescued, she has these incredibly awkward to watch, shallow scenes with Peter Parker. I really have no idea why he loves her so much in this movie. Then we get the Green Goblin as the villain, and while Willem Dafoe is hilariously creepy in this movie, the villain is just terrible. He has no motivation. He achieves what he wanted to achieve in his first scene in costume, so what else does he have to do? Like I said, Peter Parker isn't very proactive in this film, so the Green Goblin keeps having to find ways to lure Spider-Man towards him. The main problem, aside from the fact that he has no motivation, and is just kinda evil for the sake of being evil, is that his costume is absolutely hilariously atrocious. To quote Weird Al, he's wearing that stupid Power Rangers mask, and he's scarier without it on. I couldn't have put it better myself. Though to be fair, when I see the masks that were considered for this movie, I thank God they didn't pick this one. Ugh. So you're probably wondering, Sam, you said you don't believe that this movie deserves to be bashed all the time, yet most of your points in this review seem to be negative. Well, while all those things weighed the movie down, the movie also has a lot of positives. This movie without a doubt captured the tone of Spider-Man incredibly well. Sam Raimi was fully aware when making this movie that it was going to be a little cheesy at times, but I think the warm tone this movie has is part of why I love watching it so much. It makes me feel happy, it puts me in the mood for a fun adventure, and it appeals to the child in all of us. It's as if the Spider-Man from the Amazing Spider-Man comics had leapt off the page into this movie. I also think it's got great humour, and people complain that Spider-Man doesn't joke, but he does on occasion, and the jokes that he does make on occasion are actually quite funny.
That's a cute outfit. Did your husband give it to you?
But the movie gets its best comedic moments from J.K. Simmons playing J. Jonah Jameson. This character is really easy to hate in the comics, and while I love him anyway, he's just a blast to watch here. J.K. Simmons was born to play this role. I also think that while the characters aren't explored much and the main ones are quite bad, this is an incredibly entertaining movie. The action, the fast pace and the music manages to draw you into the comic book universe and lets you enjoy the ride. But the best thing without a doubt is the score by Danny Elfman. The opening sequences in the Spider-Man trilogy are one of the few opening sequences that I don't ever fast forward through because the score is so damn good. As with John Williams' score for Superman, the theme seems to capture everything you consider the character to be about. When I hear this score, I know that it's Spider-Man. It's really where I think the movie gets its identity from. It's memorable, fun, it has an emotional weight, and is it just me or does it really make you think of Spider-Man crawling around? While Spider-Man's characters are a bit bland and the story is very cookie cutter, the movie makes up for those flaws with a great score, fun action, and a tone that perfectly captures what Spider-Man is all about. Overall, its saving grace is that it's a really entertaining film. Is it great? No. Is it good? I'd say yes. So after just having done this review, I know I'm going to get a lot of this. Sam, you bashed The Amazing Spider-Man and said that it doesn't work as a genuine film for all the flaws you listed, yet Spider-Man 2002 seems to have similar flaws, yet you give it a pass. I really hate to compare these movies because my whole issue with The Amazing Spider-Man was that everyone compares it to the 2002 film, and so people don't seem to judge it as a genuine movie on its own. But I know I'm going to get this anyway, so I'm going to tell you why now. Bear in mind that this comparison is not why I either dislike The Amazing Spider-Man nor like Spider-Man 2002. I think where this movie succeeds and The Amazing Spider-Man fails is that despite all the flaws, the movie is well paced, it doesn't rely on a sequel to justify its existence, and it's a fun, entertaining movie with a lot of charm. I find that The Amazing Spider-Man spends so much time weighing itself down with originitis for no reason, and there really was no reason to retell the origin in that movie. They kept saying it was the untold story and it really wasn't. Yes, in The Amazing Spider-Man the visuals are better than 2002, but that's more expected. Of course the visuals are going to look better 10 years later. I also find that The Amazing Spider-Man reaches a point where it just gets boring. The clunky pacing makes the movie come across as more of a list of things that happen. This happens, then this happens, then this happens, then Spider-Man defeats the Lizard. It all feels too much like an incoherent mess. And the movie takes itself so seriously that it doesn't feel fun at all. I get that Spider-Man is surrounded by tragedy, but there needs to be moments of lightheartedness, and while the movie has that on occasion, it's not enough. Because of this, the movie kind of feels depressing, and that stops it appealing to the child in us and children in general. Spider-Man 2002 also ends with Peter being selfless, whereas in The Amazing Spider-Man, Peter dumps Gwen pretty much for the same reason, but then he says, "Don't worry, we'll get back together in the sequel," which makes him completely selfish and in the end unlikable. While Spider-Man 2002 lacks the deep characters and the story is quite predictable, it's a very entertaining movie, and overall the main goal of a movie is to entertain people, and that's where this movie for me succeeds, and that's where The Amazing Spider-Man fails. Cheers for watching guys, and as always if you like this video you can subscribe to my channel.